All right, guys, now we've got a very special guest. We're joined by the voice of the Raiders, Jason Horowitz. Jason, how we doing, my man?
Jesse, I'm fantastic. Well, deep into May. How about you?
Hey, same, man. I've been knee-deep in hockey. It's been a lot of fun, and I welcome any opportunity to dive back into it and talk football. So I've been excited to hop back on the pod while Eddie's away on daddy duty.
We were texting. Eddie and I were looking at pictures. He was sending me pictures of the baby.
Yeah.
That's a good-looking baby,
Heck
dude.
yeah, it is.
I mean, it is a very good-looking 5-week-old that he has there.
Yeah.
And he said he's not sleeping, so he's being thrown right into the fire right away.
Yeah, he may not be at work, but he's still putting in plenty of work. I've been texting back and forth with him too, and he said he's more tired than he ever has been, even at work. So you gotta love it doing the daddy thing. It's so cool, so fired up for him and the boss. So really cool stuff. With you though, I mean, like, what have you been up to? Since the season ended and everything like that.
Well, so dove right into college basketball season, and we got to the NCAA tournament, and I hosted the tournament for Westwood One. And Final Four in Houston, we turned around and went right to the draft. So I host the NFL draft for SiriusXM NFL Radio. So pick one through Mr. Irrelevant is on Channel 88 on SiriusXM is a lot of in-depth conversation. And to my analysts, it's a lot of sometimes I think I know what I'm talking about and sometimes I don't. And I let them roll with that, which is great. No, but it's good. It's weird. This is my first year where I've ever had an off season where I know, the off season is pointing towards a team season. I've never had that before. Every year I've ever covered college or pro football or any football for that matter, it's always been covering a variety of games and a variety of teams. So this has been my first off season getting ready for one team and following all the stories. And it's a nice change of pace. I like it.
Oh, I can imagine. How long, out of curiosity, did it take your voice to recover from day 1 through day 3, all those picks?
I mean, in all fairness, it's not like I'm talking through every pick.
Yeah.
But no, it's actually, I think I talk more during the NCAA tournament because we're bouncing people around from site to site. And between the hour pregame show and the hour and a half postgame show, and however much basketball is playing in between on day 1, 2, 3, and 4, that usually takes a couple of days of leave me alone. Don't talk to me. No, the draft was good. And it got home Saturday night for fourth grade softball Sunday, bright and early.
There you go. See, good dad, and he gets the work done as well. You got to love that. With that, let's start with the draft, man, and specifically, obviously, with the Raiders. What was your takeaway from the draft and the haul of picks that they left with?
Yeah. So I like it. I think obviously this is dependent upon, and this is the same for every franchise, it's dependent upon if they work out or not, right?
Yeah.
But if Tyree Wilson is what everyone's writing about and seems to be, and that ceiling is even higher, that with Max Crosby for a long time is a recipe for success. You come back around and you go with a tight end that I know they really liked, and a lot of people, at least through the process, were high on. Obviously, a position of need. Yes, the signing of Hooper and O.J. Howard, but those are shorter deals, right? So you bring in Michael Mayer for the long term and a different type of guy from the other two. So I think that's great. I'm a big fan of Christopher Smith, right? Covering college football the way that I have for the last few years. He, again, you never know with a fifth rounder, but Nate Hobbs was a fifth rounder, right?
Exactly.
He was our best cornerback when healthy last year. So, and hopefully for a long time to come. But Christopher Smith, when you watch him play at Georgia, obviously they have a lot of professional guys and they're all on the Eagles, but he was always around and making really intelligent plays. You go back to, I don't remember what game it was, but it was a block kick, field goal, and he was the only one that knew you pick it up and run with it.
Yeah.
And they scored. You go back to the national championship game against Alabama, he's leading the way for the game-winning or game-sealing interception return for a touchdown. So he's a guy that I think there's a lot of things to like about. Hopefully it works out. They were really high on Tucker. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people were surprised that there was a wide receiver in the third round that they went for, particularly with the amount of receivers that were signed this offseason. And obviously they're not going to all make the roster because there's a lot more than 5 or 6 wide receivers who they've signed here this offseason, including this last week. But you go draft a receiver in the third round, there's clearly a reason why. And it's all about the explosive traits, and they're really high on him. And hopefully that's something that makes a difference.
Yeah, no, 100%. And so kind of with that, I mean, you obviously talked a lot about Smith. And for me, kind of wholesale takeaway from the draft, they get a lot of guys that had a lot of ball production in college, a lot of starts, guys with experience. And that's something we've seen in the 2 drafts thus far with this, management coming in here. I'm curious, is there a favorite of the picks there? Maybe it's Chris Smith, maybe it's someone else, one that just really stood out to you where you're like, I'm really curious to see how this guy pans out.
Well, I mean, it's a hit or miss thing, right? I mean, so I'm going to go away from the first couple rounds because the first couple rounds are names. I mean, the draft as a whole is so saturated that by the time we actually get to the draft, anyone who follows football, whether you know anybody beforehand or not, like you feel like you knew Tyree Wilson his entire college career.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, most people didn't watch a lot of Texas Tech play throughout the course of the last couple of years. But you know that he led the Big 12 in plays behind the line of scrimmage because it's talked about so much. And, you know, how is a Texas Tech defensive player that in the top 10? And we're going to find out, right? But I'm going to go away from those guys. And I got a chance to meet Aiden O'Connell a couple of times over the last couple of years working for Big Ten Network, both radio and television side. And there's a lot of specialness there. Now, I know people have talked about not his inability to move, his inability. He's not fast. He doesn't have the strongest arm, all of that stuff. But you talk to Jeff Brom, there is a massive leadership quality there for a guy that was an 8th string walk-on quarterback to become one of the best in Purdue history.
Yeah.
And, you know, you talk about the history of Purdue football. You're talking about Drew Brees. You're talking about Kyle Orton. You go back to Gary Danielson. There's much more than that. And you talk about Aiden O'Connell completing over 70% of his passes. But people are like, well, yeah, but David Bell was there. He's an All-American receiver. He's gone. What's going to happen? He goes in the 3rd round of the Browns last year, and he turns around and he gets a high school teammate who had never caught more than, I think, 15 passes or whatever it was for Charlie Jones. And he turns him into an All-American.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to like with Aiden O'Connell. It's a 4th round quarterback, so expectations are whatever they're going to be. And there's a lot to like about that kid, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I always laugh with quarterbacks, you know, when people are like, oh, well, he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that. And then it's like you get a guy that was the most accurate passer in the history of Purdue football, and it's like, whoa, well, I don't know. And like, what's the number one job of a quarterback is to put the ball
That's
on
right.
the numbers.
Throw people open.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I don't remember who it was who said this a couple of weeks ago, but there's a guy who works with quarterbacks, high school, college, and a lot of them who are now in the pros, and said there's like 20 quarterbacks in the pros who he's worked with who can't throw guys open.
Yeah.
And Aiden O'Connell is as good at throwing guys open, which it just means he's anticipating, he's putting in the work. Like if you're overcoming for not having a strong arm or being able to escape the pocket, you're doing something right. And there's obviously a lot that he does right.
So obviously the draft is cool because, you know, you leave that with, you know, a stable of players, new talent kind of ejected into things. When you pair that with the moves made in free agency, like what's your take kind of wholesale on everything that was done in the offseason?
You know, I think a lot of experience, right? They bring in a lot of experience. I think if you go back to what we all talked about in January and February, hey, what are the biggest things that the Raiders need to address? The first and foremost was the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, there was a question at quarterback, right? That's the obvious. Derek Carr wasn't being brought back. What was that going to be? Was it Aaron Rodgers? Was it somebody in the draft? And that answer was Jimmy Garoppolo. And you know, let's all hope that pans out. He's won a lot of football games. He's taken teams very far into the playoffs before. So let's hope that pans out. And they'll figure out the long-term answer for that. But then beyond the quarterback spot, the real big picture was, would there be additions to the offensive line? So far, the answer to that has been no. They're happy with the guys that they are either bringing off of injury, re-signing to this roster. And then what are they going to do on the defensive side of the ball? And they brought in a bunch of guys that they know in some form or fashion, whether it's players that Patrick Graham knew or players that maybe they knew from the Patriots or some guys who have had production like Jenkins in this league. And then you go to the draft, and a lot of the draft was on the defensive side of the ball. So there's a lot of unknown. I think there was clearly hey, we want to infuse offensive talent to help Jimmy Garoppolo. Jacoby Myers and signing tight ends, even though they traded there. Like, so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, hey, this is going to be our stamp on this team and it's going to work the way we want it to, or it's not.
Yeah. And
they're going to go down with or live with that. And I think frankly, I think that's how you want to do it as a front office.
No, I agree. And I think if you look at that kind of wholesale offensively, just in terms of the talent that they did add there, obviously we all know what Darren Waller is and what he provided to this team.
Sure.
But I think wholesale with the pieces they brought in, and who knows who ends up being on the roster, you know, when the season starts. But I think you could make an argument that this offense is more talented than it was last year because of the weapons that he has at his disposal. Or the number of them.
I think so. Well, a couple of things, right? Let's not forget, Matt Collins was never really an offensive weapon in his career. And last year, you know, Derek Carr helped make him into a guy who was, you know, my 9-year-old daughter's favorite player. Now part of that is because she met him on the field and was really taken by the fact that he wasn't wearing shoes.
Yeah.
But became, a fan favorite and, had a lot of really good moments last year. And so I think there's some of that goes to Derek's credit. I think some of that's the offense's credit. It's also a team that Darren missed 8 games. Hunter missed half the season. And so you're bringing in a whole bunch of different guys, and these are our guys that we want to be this offense. And I don't know what that means yet, right? Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing.
Yeah.
We'll see how he can follow that up, assuming he signs the franchise tag. What Devontae Adams is, and that's going to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver. And the rest of those parts, let's see what happens. Jacoby Myers was on a team where he kind of had to be part A for Mac Jones. He doesn't have to be part A. He has to be part B. And that's, I think, a very different role and something I think he's going to succeed in. And the question is the tight end group. Austin Hooper's a 2-time Pro Bowler. O.J. Howard's a former top 20 pick. These are guys that have had success in the NFL. Let's see if they can recreate that.
100%, man. I think it's so many people that aren't necessarily – it's not just all Devontae. There's so many other pieces that can be moved in here. And even if it was just Devontae, I think we can all agree, he's pretty good at football.
That's a heck of a piece.
Exactly.
That's a really good piece.
Yeah, so last one for me here. Let's jump onto the other side of the ball here defensively. Obviously, we talked about the fact that was where a lot of the need was. So, looking at everything that happened from, the end of the season till now, what do you think kind of the story is defensively and how this group kind of builds off of the foundation they maybe tried to build last year?
So there's a couple of pieces that I think they, definitely need to replace, right? Denzel Perriman not re-signing him and him going to the Texans. I know he got hurt at the end of the year. There were a lot of big plays that he made when healthy.
Yeah.
He did miss a bunch of time at different times of the year and then missed the end of the year. But when healthy, he made a bunch of different plays. But I think there's one guy that we forget sometimes last year was playing pretty well until he got hurt. And that was Divine Diablo. I think when we all speak about the linebacking core and how badly they needed to address that, I think a lot of people forgot about the fact that I don't remember specifically what the number was when he got hurt, but he was top 7, top 8 in the NFL in tackles. He was all over the field. Now, will his coverage skills improve? Will they be able to cover the middle of the field? How will they handle that? Is Marcus Epps the answer there? There's a lot of those question marks that I think that only time will tell, and we'll have a good idea once we get through September and into early October. But it's a different defense. And then I think you also go back and you're like, hey, there's a couple of guys that weren't supposed to be pieces to this team that were, and then see what happens go from year 1 to year 2. And that's Luke Masterson and Sam Webb, right? Sam Webb had a couple of really good games. Luke Masterson came in because they needed him to and played really well. So that doesn't even take into account how good of a run stopper Robert Spillane is. And now he steps into a different role because they bring him in. So there's a lot of parts to all this. The question mark is still going to be, can they cover over the middle? Can they get a stop when they have to? Right. And that's the question mark of who's going to be the opposite part for Max Crosby. Right. You hope it's a resurgence for Chandler Jones or it's Tyree Wilson or somebody else. Can they get pressure up the middle? Because that was a struggle last year. And then can they get off the field on third down? And if the answer to half of those questions are yes, 6-11 is who knows what that turns into.
Exactly. I'm real curious to see what the progression looks like on that side of the ball. And, maybe a guy like Byron Young is one who pops coming out of the third round, along that defensive line. So with that, Jason, we'll wrap it up. We appreciate you joining us. But quickly, if Raider Nation is trying to hear your voice, because I know this is the first time we've had you in the pod, where can they find you? What are you up to in the next couple months here?
So I'm still doing shows on SiriusXM. The schedule varies week to week, but we're still over on SiriusXM 84, which is college sports radio. And the answer is they can also hear me wherever we get to Raider Nation Radio with Q and the boys in the morning and and JT. So, but you also just may want to put the Chandler Jones call on loop on your phone, and then you just hear that.
I would 100% do that. Yeah, Raider Nation probably listens to that as they go to bed, or maybe in the morning that gets them hyped. I don't know.
I don't even know if I could recreate that voice crack if I try. I don't know that I'll ever actually be able to. Maybe listen to the Josh Jacobs touchdown call instead. Listen to that instead.
Legendary stuff, man. We appreciate the time as always, Jason. Can't wait to hear you back on the airwaves talking Raiders football during the season again, man.
All right, man. Great to see you.